This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. What's the world like for a young puma in California? What would they encounter, and what would they make of the humans acting strangely in their landscape? Scientist Dr. Tiffany Yap and artist Meital Smith put together what they think that may look like in the incredible Tales of the Urban Wild, A Puma's Journey, now available from Reverberation Books. Dr. Yap, a conservation scientist, wrote the story of a young puma named C8 by local scientists who explores the world around him. Meital Smith, a multidisciplinary artist, developed the incredible artwork that pulls together the graphic novel into a poignant, evocative read. To share more about the motivation behind the story, the artwork, and why the narrative of a young puma navigating the world is more important today than ever before, Dr. Tiffany Yap and Meital Smith join Defender Radio. Where did the idea for Tales of the Urban Wild begin? Did it come from the idea of Dr. Yap, what you're experiencing, doing research? Meital, did it come from you? I mean, these are incredible illustrations throughout. I absolutely love it. There's a beautiful mixture of style and emotion and everything. So which side of it did it start on? Or was it one of those 2 a.m. having tea outside and go, you know what we should do? Write a book.
Yeah, I guess I could take this one. Honestly, it came about because the publisher, Greg Grouse at Reverberations Books, he emailed me after he had read an op-ed about some of the work we do at the Center for Biological Diversity regarding wildlife connectivity. And I was talking about pumas and wolves and the need for connectivity so that pumas can maintain in California, but then also wolves can return to California. And it was because anyway, we don't need to get into that. But so it was an op-ed that he was reading, and he reached out to me and he was like, hey, like, I have this publishing company and I'd love to publish a graphic novel about the environment. Like, is this something that you would be interested in writing for me? And I was like, wow, I think this might be spam, but I am like super intrigued. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it just came out of the blue. I've not written any graphic novels before. I've not written any stories before. Like, I've written scientific papers and reports, But when he posed the question, I was so intrigued, and I talked to him about it, and I was like, well, could it be about like the environment is a very broad topic. Like, is there something you had in mind? Because, just thinking about the work that I do, I work a lot with mountain lions in California and all the struggles they face living in the urban wildland interface, from getting hit on the roads to being poisoned by rat poison, dying in wildfires, all because we've fragmented the habitat so much and we've really impinged on wildlife connectivity, which is a lot of the things that I work on, right? And so when I posed that to him, he was like, oh, like, yeah, I'm open to the idea. Like, what do you like? Let's flesh out the story a little bit more. And I was like, okay, well, maybe we could be a mountain lion following a young mountain lion trying to find his own territory. He's dispersed from his mom, and just kind of showcasing the struggles that they face to live amongst us, like all the threats that I just mentioned. But at the same time, because they're such wide-ranging species and they cover so much area, it would really be a great opportunity to also highlight the awesome biodiversity that we have in our own backyards, and also to highlight people who are interacting with that wildlife, whether they realize it or not. And so then the story kind of evolved, and the ideas and what to incorporate kind of evolved. A lot of it was inspired by the work that I do at the center, in particular to get mountain lions protected under the California Endangered Species Act. But then what was cool about it was I could also pull from my experiences as a herpetologist studying different salamanders and frogs, and like having friends who study other animals too, to like really showcase also the scientific efforts that go into us trying to understand these animals more and how we can better coexist. and also offering solutions to how we can protect these animals, while also making communities safer for people. So it did stem from that. And then we were lucky enough to find Meital to help us tell his story and illustrate as beautifully as she did. And she agreed to join the team. And here we are.
And it's a remarkable book. I absolutely loved reviewing it. And it's one that I very strongly recommend people look for. I think we'll get more into the book and stuff. I'm curious, though, Meital, what's your background and what was your perspective sort of coming into the project?
Yeah, when I was like, one of my old professors at Cornish College of the Arts is like a contact of Greg's, and heard that Greg was looking for a illustrator for this graphic novel. And for my senior year of college, I created this like short graphic novel that was compiled from a bunch of interviews that I did of my summer camp community about their camp stories. So my professor knew that I like had the skill set of like being able to create a decent looking graphic novel in a very short amount of time. And also like for that past year, I was doing like a plus year at my college, because they did this really cool thing during COVID where as long as you were enrolled during the online year, they would let you take a year free classes. Like, yeah. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I learned how to screen print during that year. And so I learned a lot about like different art techniques like layering and like transparency and stuff that like directly translated to like the making of this book. Which we can get more into the specifics of that if you want. But basically my professor is like, hey, you should apply to this. I think you can do it. And so I sent my stuff to Tiffany and Greg, and they had me do a couple of sample pages that they liked. And then I took the project. It was great.
And yeah, it's obviously a match made in heaven, because it just blends together the narrative, the adventure, the science, all of it. The art pulls it together in such a fascinating way. I think one of my favorite things is the field journal style spreads that are throughout the book, where it's for listeners. It's the page has been made up to look like a notebook with scrap paper and photos and stuff that have been cut out and taped to things with notes. Literally what I imagine, Dr. Yap, your field notebooks might look like at times. I'm curious, was there like here's a picture that I took, we should use this as a basis, or here's a specific event I attended or moment that I attended, can we use that? Did you pull heavily from that kind of experience and personal stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So it was kind of a mix. Some of it is my own stuff, but also some of it is stuff from friends. And also there is actually an amazing amount of information, photos and videos online of folks who are studying mountain lions and like all the awesome things they see. And we have wildlife camera footage. Like there's just so many amazing resources. And so, but yeah, I would definitely, so the way that I wrote the manuscript is I'd write, like the text and that would be on the pages, and then like the descriptions of the different images that I wanted to see. And then along with that, I would bombard Meital with like links and links and links to all these different things. They were either links to my folders with the photos and videos, or they'd be links to other websites, because I wanted, there's one way, like I might describe something, and the way I describe it, who knows, like I have an image in my brain, but who knows how someone else might interpret it, right? It could be completely different. And so what I wanted to make sure that it was kind of a collaborative process where Meital would kind of understand what was inspiring my thoughts and visions. And I would hope that she would see what I wrote, but then also be inspired by what she's seeing on these videos and images. And so there was definitely, so I definitely bombarded her with a lot of different things to look at for references, so that she could, get a better idea of what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, what I remember from like the first, like field notes pages and how we were figuring out how to depict them, because like if I remember correctly, the field notes pages were like they were like pullouts from the actual story, and it's where like Tiffany was really excited about like some scientific content that I know she just really wanted to get in there somehow, but didn't like necessarily fold into the story. So we were going back and forth, like wondering how to like fold this into the design of the book. And then I was thinking, oh, well, like scientists have notebooks, just like artists. So like we could do that, and then I think it kind of blossomed from there.
Yeah, and it does blend seamlessly. And I know, Dr. Yap, you're very passionate about salamanders and your work that you've done. So it's great to see that, the Puma in the story comes across these people in the middle of the road at night doing something. And it is thinking back to when you and I spoke earlier this year about your field work and some of those California-based projects. Looking at this, I'm hearing what you said in the back of my head. And I think that's very telling of how well this came together. Awesome. Yes, you told me about this separately, and that's kind of what it looked like in my head. But then that also has the New Protectors page, one of those field notebooks where you get to mention some of the great groups that are doing work and what that looks like and why it's important. So I think that's, for me, one of the great takeaways from this entire project you've created is, yes, it's the story of a puma. And that's a very solid story of an animal, an individual, a young person exploring the world around them, encountering challenges, right? It's a very classic tale in that way. But it then introduces, as you say, the biodiversity. And as this puma is going around, they're not just experiencing things in isolation. We're seeing the experience of the other animals. And I think very importantly, what the humans are sometimes thinking. They may be creating an issue for the the puma, and not know. And that, I think, is such a potent point of the story that sometimes gets left is, yes, humans create the problems, but it's not always intentional. Sometimes we're just doing our thing and don't know we're creating this issue. Yeah. Was that something that you were very conscious of in your writing and development?
Yeah. No, thank you for all those kind words. And it makes me really happy to hear that, because that was all the things you said were things that I was trying to do and hoping that it was coming through. I think oftentimes, particularly when, it's conservation advocacy, sometimes not all the pieces are there. There's not a holistic picture where, people aren't separate from nature. We're in nature. Yep. We live in mountain lion habitat. We have birds in our backyard. We might even have salamanders in our backyard, right? And what we do affects them, and how they're doing and what their health is affects us, right? We can have cleaner air, cleaner water, better mental health from just like seeing the bird outside our window or walking outside for a little bit, And so I think it was really important to me to try to embody this feeling of we are all connected. And, there are things that we can do to make things better, and there are things we can do to make things worse. And to be more mindful of that, because, we have all these wild neighbors around us that also benefit us. So we can do things that benefit them, and they can do things that benefit us. And so I think that was a very big goal of mine, to really try to expand folks' like view of what it is, to what nature is, and where wildlife live and where we live.
Yeah, and I think it's done very effectively. Again, through the journey of our young puma, we see different habitats, we see different ecosystems, we see how different people are reacting to different things. And I also note that you've got a lovely diversity among your people throughout this. Was there a lot of intention in ensuring representation through the graphic novel? And is that fueled by experience?
Yeah. Well, again, like Tiffany's the one that wrote the book, but I like was really glad to see in her manuscript that there like was a lot of intentional diversity baked in, like especially for scientific spaces. I'm not like intimately familiar with scientific spheres, but it seems like, you know, that it's had its issues with like being accessible to like people of a lot of different backgrounds. And like I think for just like in my part as an illustrator, like being able to showcase that like yes, like anybody could do this, you know, like this, like, you know, providing an example for people that maybe like don't fit the mold of what they like, you know, a scientist looks like, quote unquote. And like just showing them that like yes, a scientist can look like this, it can look like any person, you know. And that was really important to me, so I'm glad that me and Tiffany aligned on that.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked on that too. And it was something that was really important to me. I think representation is really important because, as you mentioned, like the historical exclusion of different groups is real, and is still, you can still feel it in these spaces. And I think a lot about when I was younger, like when I was writing this book, a lot of it too was like, what would I have wanted to see as like 10-year-old, 12-year-old, even high school age, even me now, actually, I'm so excited that it's out as old as I am now. And so, but as I was writing it, I was, what would I have as a kid wanted to see more of? And like, I would have wanted to see more people that look like me in these kinds of stories. Like, I think, I've always loved animals, you know, I've always, I studied biology in college, went to grad school in environmental science. And I think a lot of times as a woman of color, I was often a minority in those spaces. And I know that there are other people who feel that way too, whether they're the LGBTQ community, and things like that. And so I think to me, it was really important to have this story be inclusive, so that people could see themselves in these spaces, whether it was as a scientist studying whatever species, or even like someone who lives in an area that these animals pass through, or, you know, people who want to go to the closed road at night to go check out some newts. Like, anybody can do that. And so I think it was something that was very intentional and really important to me to be in the book. And so I was really stoked when Meital was just as excited as I was about it.
I'd like to talk a bit about the art style. I was, when Tiffany told me about the book when we had spoken last, I was very interested by it and curious because, again, I think there's a lot of educational content for kids around wildlife. There's a lot of storybooks for kids about wildlife, but they tend to adopt very cute styles, and their purpose is often to be just visually pleasing. And you know, the red character is the main one, the green characters are not. And maybe you'll see watercolor used, or maybe you'll see paper cutouts used, but it's always very simplistic in its essence. And I find throughout this, there is, as you noted, the mixture of texture and layering is really engaging, particularly with the clearly hand-drawn style of the pumas and the animals through this. You've got highly detailed animals. You've got a lot of expression on their faces. But then there is that clear separation between sort of the foreground style and the background style. And it makes me think a lot of films I've seen, Wolf Walkers, if you're familiar with it, an Irish-based film, animated, really interesting art. It's a great one to check out. And then a well-known one, or more well-known one, the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse one that won all of the arts awards because of its distinct visual style. It's engaging, it's exciting. There's always something to see in the picture that could have just been left blank, right? You could just go, oh, it's nighttime, so it's black. The end. But you've introduced all of these textures and layers. Now that I've done explaining your art, I'm wondering if you could share a bit about sort of what went into that process. And great example. I've been flipping through the PDF I have the entire time, and the opening title page for A Mother's Love, Chapter 1, is a great example of it. You've just got all of these different layers creating depth and texture and movements, and then the sort of brilliance of that puma in the foreground. So how do you get from here's a manuscript to this masterpiece of art storytelling.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. I'm glad you like it. Let's see. Well, the process that me and Tiffany went through, like I'll talk about the process that me and Tiffany went through, like together to make the book first, and then like I guess my journey as an artist second. But like how we started this process is that Tiffany sent me this big long manuscript, right? And then I would go through page by page and do like sketches on paper, even though like we knew that in the end this was going to be drawn digitally, like on the iPad. For whatever reason, my brain just works faster when it's pencil to paper, especially when I'm like starting to work something out. So I would do these like rough but detailed enough sketches that Tiffany and our editor Justine could like know what was going on and get a good feel of the page. And I would send batches of 20 to them every 2 weeks, and then they would come in, like they would see them and look at them and give me notes for like when we moved on to the inking part. And that took, I don't know, a couple months, like 3 months, 4 months, I don't know at this point how long it took. It was a while ago. It all blurs together. And then from there, they would send them back to me with some notes like, oh, this looks great, or like, oh, I like the positioning on this should be changed a little bit. Or I remember specifically, I had the tendency to make the ears bigger than were really scientifically accurate, just because I thought it was so cute. And then Tiffany was like, okay, I get it, but you need to scale it back a little bit. And I was like, oh, you're probably right.
They were very cute, though. They were very cute.
They were very cute. Yeah, but it was the right call. It was the right call. And then from there, once we got through all those sketches, I would scan in the pages and then go start drawing directly on top of them in Procreate. And like the way the book was printed, it is just 2 colors. Like the printer just uses 2 colors. But like the way we get all those different like colors in the book is through different opacities of the yellow and the brown being laid on top of each other. So that's where my screen printing experience really came in handy, and why my professor thought I would be had a good skill set for this book, is because in constructing these files, I really had to think about, okay, so what does 20% opacity of yellow look like over 20% opacity of brown? And that mix is actually what created the Puma's coat, so it's like more of a neutral color. Yeah. Right. So that's sort of puzzling together every page of how to get these different opacities to make of the same colors to make this whole wide range of a palette. So that was a fun process. And definitely one that scratches an itch in my brain. You were talking about how, oh yeah, there's all this detail in the background where it could just be left blank. I think in a lot of graphic novels, that is sort of the name of the game of where you can cut corners, because it's a very long process. Yep. But I don't know, something in my brain just really craves a lot of detail, which maybe makes me a slower worker than is profitable, but it's definitely a lot more satisfying for me. So I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah. And I think for me, in terms of my style, I guess I was always drawn to, because an artist's style is just an amalgam of what they consume and what they like, so I remember as a younger artist, being so obsessed with this, oh, I got to find my style. I got to find something that's me, and looking up, artists that were more experienced than me on how they found their style. And they would always answer the same thing of it'll just come to you, and I thought that was so frustrating, because it's something as a younger artist that you want right away. But that's just not how it happens. I feel a style, your way of working is this combination of like things that you're drawn to, that you see, and just how your brain like interprets the world. And for me, that presents itself in like this sort of like semi-realistic, semi-cartoony sort of blend where like that's just the way that my brain and my body likes to make pictures.
It works.
Yeah.
It absolutely works. It's quite lovely. And there's the amount of emotion at times, I think is very impactful as well. That's something I find in reading things like this can be very difficult, is doing that over the top Disneyfication of anthropomorphizing an animal and their emotions and then not giving them any and being like, hey, Descartes had a point. But I think you found that balance of like, no, they can be startled. This is what the puma looks like, startled, and a person can be laughing. This is what they look like, laughing. And it's not like on a stage where you have to elevate everything by 50% so people in the back row can see it. It's that nice balance of it. And one of the very impactful graphic situations, and I'd like to get into the storytelling of it, is the fire section, talking about wildfire and its impact. So there's a couple of good clips. They speak to me as a former print journalist, where you've got the boards of information connecting to each other, newspaper clippings and stuff. And the style of the flames is very, I don't know what to describe it as. I don't have the words, but it's very provocative in contrast to the rest of the scenery. When we look at those images, it stands out as there's movement and chaos within this. But as you said, it's still that same color palette, incredibly. So I think it's a very impressive feat to pull that off and really illustrate it. But it's also a very scary and upsetting story that this is happening. So I'm curious, how do you, and both of you, how do you present that as like this real threat to our survival, this real threat to our ecosystems? But we want kids to be reading this and not, sitting under the blankets at night, counting their escape plans over and over and over, like some of us may have done when we got our first book on volcanoes, like Mount St. Helens, which is nowhere near we live, and mom and dad had to come home early because volcanoes can go off and we all turn to ash. That's great. My 10-year-old brain can process this. Thanks for bringing that book home, Mom. Anyway, back to this interview. So how do we do that, though? How do we find that balance between the two?
This is a really good question. And I think the way I tried to tackle it is based a lot on my experience with it, because I do a lot of work with wildfire risk issues, land use and wildfire risk issues. That's one of the big issues that we've been facing for many years now. And I just remember when I first started getting into it and doing some research on it, like I lived in San Francisco. There were like smoky skies because there was a wildfire going on. And we had just heard about the wildfire in, I think it was the Tubbs fire. And then also the fire that destroyed the city of Paradise. And so like, I was reading through all the stories of how people were affected by it. And there would just be, and it just got so overwhelming because I was looking at like, okay, like how are like our wildfire regime is off right now, and it's causing like that with more sprawl development in high fire prone areas, and climate change is causing more fire to be destructive to people. Like, so I was looking up the scientific information on that, like what different ecosystems have different fire regimes. But then I was also reading all the stories of how people were being affected. And like, there would be days where I'd be in my office and just like tears reading all these just like really horrific stories, and how many like everyone going through evacuations, everyone, some people not making out, like some people getting, and so it was really emotional, and it was really overwhelming. And it was at times I'd be like, oh my God, there's no hope. But like, there is hope. There are a lot of things that we can do to improve the situation, to make it better, to make everyone safer, to keep communities, to keep families safe. And we just need to let more people know about it. And so like, that's kind of, that was my mental space, I think, when I was writing that chapter of the book, because I wanted folks to I wanted it to be educational so people would learn more about like why are we getting more wildfires now? And why are they being more destructive?
Yeah.
What was the history of fire in these areas? What were indigenous people doing when they were doing their cultural burns? Like, things like that. And what led to, how things are now. We've a lot more agriculture, a lot more development, no more cultural burns, and so there are all these different things that are affecting it, that are affecting not just people but also the wildlife around us. And so I think, to balance it out, I wanted people to know that these are things that are happening, but there are also these hopeful solutions to these issues, and to do it in a way that could feel a little bit more personal. That's when we brought in like this cuter elderly couple who finds an injured mountain lion in their yard, and she's injured because her paws were burned in the fire. And so, I think that also that part of the story kind of helps pull people in a little bit more to get more specific about this, the journey of this other puma. And the scientists who want, like, community members who want to help her, they call the scientists over. The scientists can help her, and she actually has a successful recovery. So I wanted to show both sides of that, but not make it too harrowing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's I think comes across of no, and it does illustrate that there is a lot that can be done and a lot of people who are working to get things done. And I think a really great place for us to wrap up is with the ultimate question: is the scientist in the book Dr. Tiffany Yap? Because there's one scene, and I'm pulling it up again, I saw it before, where the scientist is giving a presentation about the puma, and I think might be wearing the same shirt you're wearing right now during this interview. It's got that kind of like faux collar thing going on, and it looks like it might be a bluish hue, even though it's got the yellow. So
amazing.
I'm curious, was the character based on you?
So the character is not based on me, but that particular thing is something that I do. So that her giving a talk at the community center, like that is very much what I would do.
Yes.
But that is not me. But I am in the book. Both Meital and I are in the book, actually. Because why not? We created it.
Yeah. It's like a more fun version of what Hitchcock did.
But so I am one of the herpetologists in the book yeah. And Meital is in there, I think probably more than once. And so she's in there holding a salamander as well.
Awesome.
So that stuff, that was fun to have all these other fun things. So no, it's not me, but it's definitely that character kind of represents like strong women in their field that I've known, that I look up to. Like my mom was the chair of her department of radiology when I was growing up. And so like,
amazing.
That she definitely influenced it. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that there was like a strong woman scientist lead.
Do we have anything else you want to add before we wrap that up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess thanks for chatting with us.
Problem.
I think this has been really fun. This is my second time talking with you. It's always a pleasure and it's super fun. I'm really thankful to Meital for saying yes, to applying to do this, and then saying yes when we asked her to. I think she has done an incredible job, and like you mentioned, with the being able to balance the realistic scientific accuracy and the emotion. And I mean, you mentioned a match made in heaven, and it sounded like a little bit cheesy, but I think it's like kind of true. And like, because also while Meital was talking, she was like, oh yeah, I'm really detail oriented, so sometimes stuff takes me longer, but I'm really particular about these like details. And it's like, oh my God, so am I. This is why we work so well together. So yeah, it's been really fun. And I'm thankful that you got a lot out of it and enjoyed it. And I hope others take the time to read it and enjoy it too.
To learn more about Tales of the Urban Wild, A Puma's Journey, contact your local bookseller or library, or follow the links in this episode's show notes in your podcast app or at defenderradio.com. You can also find out more about Dr. Tiffany Yap and Meital Smith through these links. I want to thank both Dr. Yap and Meital for their time, and of course you for joining us. You can stay up to date on new episodes of the podcast by signing up for email alerts at thefurbearers.com or by following the Fur Bears on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bears, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.